The human's arm went down so fast, he barely registered the movement before his wrist was pinned to the wooden table with a force that made his teeth rattle. And the orc woman standing across from him released her grip, with what might have been the ghost of a smile tugging at her tusked mouth. Ryder Lancaster had walked into the Dusty Spoke Tavern, thinking he might find someone willing to spar with him after 3 months of disappointing matches in the frontier towns dotting the northern territories. But he had not expected this towering green-skinned warrior woman to take him down in 2 seconds flat, without even bothering to stand up properly from her bar stool. "You telegraph every move before you make it," she said, her voice deeper than most human women but somehow melodic in its gruffness. "Your shoulder drops, your weight shifts to your back foot, and your eyes focus exactly where you intend to strike. Any halfway decent fighter would see you coming from across a field." Ryder flexed his fingers, testing for damage and finding only a dull ache in his wrist. Pride stung worse than his arm. He had spent the last 5 years of his life training with the border guard, learning from veterans who had fought in skirmishes against bandits and occasional monster incursions from the deep wilderness. He had thought himself competent, maybe even skilled. This orc woman had just dismantled that illusion with the efficiency of someone swatting a fly. "I suppose I deserved that," he admitted, straightening up and rolling his shoulder. "Though usually when someone wants to prove a point, they at least let me buy them a drink first." The orc woman regarded him with eyes the color of amber catching firelight. She stood a full head taller than his own 6 feet, her frame broad and muscular, beneath a worn leather vest and simple linen shirt. Dark hair fell past her shoulders in thick waves, and the small tusks curving up from her lower jaw gave her face a fierce beauty that made something in Ryder's chest tighten unexpectedly. "I am Ghara," she said after a moment, "and I did not ask to prove a point. You came over here asking if I knew anyone who could teach you proper fighting technique. I showed you that you need teaching." "Fair enough." Ryder signaled the barkeep for 2 mugs of whatever ale the man had on tap. "Though I was expecting maybe a recommendation to a retired soldier or a traveling weapons master, not a practical demonstration of my own incompetence. Most retired soldiers in these parts would take your coin and teach you the same bad habits you already have," Ghara said, accepting the mug when it arrived with a nod of thanks. "And traveling weapons masters are usually charlatans who prey on farm boys with dreams of glory." "What does that make you? Someone passing through who happened to be in the right place to stop you from embarrassing yourself further." She took a long drink, then set the mug down with deliberate care. "But since you are buying, I suppose I could offer to teach you properly. Over dinner, perhaps. I have not had a decent meal in 3 days, and the stew here smells better than anything I could make over a campfire." Ryder blinked. He had expected rejection, maybe mockery, possibly indifference. An offer to share a meal and training had not been anywhere on his list of probable outcomes. "You would teach me, just like that," Ghara confirmed, "unless you have somewhere more important to be." "No," Ryder said quickly, perhaps too quickly based on the way Ghara's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. "No, I am free. I was planning to stay in Millbrook for a few weeks anyway, pick up some work at the lumber mill or the farms, earn enough to keep moving north." "Why north?" The question caught him off guard. Ryder considered deflecting, offering some easy lie about seeking adventure or wanting to see new places, but something in Ghara's direct gaze made him choose honesty instead. "Because I left my post with the border guard after my commander ordered us to burn out an orc settlement that had been trading peacefully with a nearby human village. The orcs had done nothing wrong except exist too close to human territory. I refused the order, got dishonorably discharged, and now I am trying to figure out what I am supposed to do with the rest of my life." Ghara's amber eyes studied him with new intensity. The noise of the tavern seemed to fade into background murmur. "That was your settlement?" Ryder asked carefully. "The one they burned? No, but I have family who lived through similar purges. Cousins, uncles, friends from my clan." She paused, her jaw tightening. "The fact that you refused such an order tells me you have more honor than most humans I have encountered. That is worth something." "Not worth much according to my former commander or the local magistrates," Ryder said with a bitter laugh. "Apparently refusing to commit what I considered murder makes me unreliable and soft. Then they are fools." Ghara raised her mug in a small salute. "To honor over orders." Ryder clinked his mug against hers, feeling something shift in the air between them. Not quite friendship, not yet, but perhaps the foundation of mutual respect. "To honor over orders," he echoed. They ordered the stew, which turned out to be thick with vegetables and chunks of venison, served with crusty bread and sharp cheese. As they ate, Ghara began to explain the fundamentals of combat awareness, pointing out the way Ryder held his eating knife with his thumb too far forward on the handle, how his shoulders tensed before he reached for his mug, how his gaze flicked to objects before his hand followed. "You move like someone who learned fighting as a series of techniques," she said, demonstrating proper knife grip by adjusting his fingers. Her hand was warm and calloused, strong enough that he could feel the contained power in her touch. "But real combat is not about techniques. It is about reading your opponent, controlling your own body's signals, and moving from instinct rather than thought. That sounds like it takes years to master. It does, but you can start building better habits immediately." Ghara tore off a piece of bread and pointed it at him like a teaching stick. "First lesson, stop thinking about what you want to do. Start thinking about what you want your opponent to think you will do. Deception." "Strategy," Ghara corrected. "Deception implies dishonesty. Strategy is about controlling information. In a real fight, the person who controls what information their opponent receives usually wins." They talked through the meal and into a second round of drinks. Ghara had a way of explaining complex ideas through simple demonstrations, using the bread and cheese as stand-ins for fighters, showing how positioning and timing mattered more than strength or speed. Ryder found himself leaning forward, fascinated not just by the lessons but by the teacher herself. Ghara spoke with confidence born from experience, and the few stories she shared about her own training suggested a life of constant movement and conflict. "Where did you learn to fight?" Ryder asked eventually. "You move like someone who has been doing this since childhood." "Because I have been," Ghara said simply. "Orc clans train their young from the time we can walk. By age 10, I could handle a spear and shield. By 15, I had fought in 3 territorial disputes against rival clans. By 20, I was leading hunting parties into the deep ranges where the great beasts still roam. And now," something shuddered behind Ghara's eyes, "now I am traveling. Seeing what lies beyond clan territories, trying to understand if there is a place in this world for orcs who do not want to spend their entire lives fighting over the same frozen valleys and harsh mountains. Is there? I have not found it yet." Ghara drained the last of her ale. "But I keep looking." The tavern had grown rowdier as the evening progressed, filling with laborers and travelers finishing their workdays. Ryder noticed several people casting suspicious glances toward their table, human faces hardening when they saw him talking companionably with an orc. An old tension prickled at the back of his neck, the same instinct that had kept him alert during his time with the border guard. Not immediate danger, but potential trouble brewing. "We are attracting attention," he said quietly. Ghara did not even glance around. I noticed when we sat down. There are 7 people in this room who have marked me as a threat. 3 have weapons within easy reach. None have made a move yet, so I am ignoring them unless that changes. Does this happen often? Every time I enter a human settlement? Ghara's tone was matter-of-fact, neither bitter nor resigned, simply stating reality. Orcs are not welcome in most places. I am tolerated as long as I spend coin, keep quiet, and leave quickly. Some towns will not even let me through the gates. That is wrong. That is the world we live in. Ghara finally looked at him directly, and Ryder saw something vulnerable flicker across her face before she locked it away. Your refusal to burn that settlement cost you your career and your reputation. Imagine what sharing a meal with me might cost you here. Ryder glanced around the room, taking in the hostile stares and whispered conversations. Part of him wanted to care about what these strangers thought, to worry about his ability to find work in Millbrook if word spread that he was friendly with an orc. But a larger part of him, the part that had refused his commander's order and walked away from everything he had known, simply could not bring himself to give those worries any weight. Then they can think whatever they want, he said firmly. You offered to teach me something valuable, and you have been nothing but straightforward and honorable in our conversation. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. Ghara studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You are either very brave or very foolish, Ryder Lancaster. Probably a bit of both, Ryder admitted with a rueful smile. But I have already lost 1 life because I chose principle over practicality. I am not about to start compromising now. Good. Ghara stood, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. Then let us begin your first real lesson. Meet me at the eastern edge of town tomorrow morning, just past the mill bridge. Bring whatever weapons you know how to use and wear clothes you do not mind getting dirty. How early? Dawn. Ryder groaned but nodded. Dawn it is. Ghara pressed a few coins onto the table to cover her share of the meal, then paused. Thank you for the conversation, Ryder. It has been some time since I spoke with a human who did not look at me as though I might attack at any moment. Thank you for the lesson, Ryder replied, and for not actually breaking my wrist when you pinned me earlier. I considered it, Ghara said, and this time there was definitely a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. But then who would I teach? She left through the tavern's main door, moving with a warrior's grace through the crowd. Several people shifted away from her as she passed, creating a bubble of empty space around her path. Ryder watched until she disappeared into the evening darkness, then finished his own drink slowly, thinking about honor and loneliness and the strange turn his life had taken. The barkeep approached as Ryder was preparing to leave, wiping down the table with practiced efficiency. You want some advice, stranger? Not particularly, Ryder said, but he kept his tone polite. I will give it anyway. The barkeep was an older man with gray threading through his beard and the weathered look of someone who had spent most of his life in hard country. That orc woman is trouble. Not because she has done anything wrong, mind you. She paid her tab, kept to herself, did not start any fights. But people around here remember the clan raids from 20 years back. They remember villages burned and families killed. You being friendly with her will make folks think you cannot be trusted. Then those folks are judging her for crimes she did not commit, Ryder said evenly, and judging me for basic decency. Maybe so, the barkeep shrugged, but fair or not, that is the reality. Just thought you should know what you are walking into. I appreciate the warning, Ryder said, meaning it despite his disagreement. But my mind is made up. He left the tavern and made his way to the small boarding house where he had rented a room for the week. Millbrook was a modest settlement built around a lumber operation, and several sprawling farms. the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business and strangers were notable simply for being unfamiliar. Ryder had chosen it precisely because it was small and out of the way, somewhere he could disappear for a while and figure out his next steps. Now, he was apparently going to spend his time training with an orc warrior woman who had demolished his fighting prowess in 2 seconds flat. And he found he did not mind that development one bit. Sleep came fitfully that night, his mind too full of thoughts about Ghara and their conversation to settle into proper rest. When dawn finally crept through his window, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Ryder rose and dressed in his oldest work clothes. He strapped on the short sword he had kept from his guard days and grabbed a simple wooden practice staff from the boarding house's small armory. Whatever Ghara had planned, he intended to be ready. The walk to the eastern edge of town took 15 minutes, leading him past the lumber mill with its massive water wheel and across the sturdy bridge spanning the creek that powered the operation. Beyond the bridge, the forest began in earnest, towering pines and thick underbrush that spoke of wilderness barely held at bay by human settlement. Ghara was already there, waiting in a small clearing just off the main path. She had changed into clothing clearly meant for training. Close-fitted leather armor over a sleeveless tunic, sturdy boots, and leather bracers on her forearms. A long staff similar to Ryder's own rested against a nearby tree, and she was in the process of stretching, working through a series of movements that looked like a combination of preparation and ritual. "You came," she said without preamble. "Good. I was half expecting you to reconsider in the cold light of morning." "I said I would be here," Ryder replied, setting down his sword and gripping the practice staff with both hands. "Where do we start?" "We start by seeing what you actually know versus what you think you know." Ghara picked up her own staff and moved to the center of the clearing. "Come at me. Full speed, full commitment. Do not hold back out of some misguided concern about hurting me." "You sure, Ryder?" Ghara's amber eyes glinted with challenge. "You could not hurt me with that staff if I stood still and let you swing for an hour. Stop overthinking and attack." Pride stung by the casual dismissal of his abilities, Ryder rushed forward. He led with a high strike aimed at Ghara's shoulder, planning to follow with a low sweep if she blocked high. The staff whistled through the air with satisfying speed. Ghara sidestepped so smoothly it looked like water flowing around stone. Her own staff came up in a gentle arc that caught Ryder's weapon and redirected its momentum, using his own force to pull him off balance. Before he could recover, she had stepped inside his guard and placed the tip of her staff against his sternum with just enough pressure to prove she could have driven it home hard enough to crack ribs. "Dead," she said simply, stepping back. "Again." They repeated the exercise a dozen times. Each attempt ended the same way, Ryder attacking with what he thought was skill and strategy, Ghara dismantling his offense with minimal effort and ending the exchange with her weapon positioned for a killing blow. By the 12th repetition, Ryder was breathing hard and sweating despite the cool morning air, while Ghara looked like she had barely exerted herself. "Enough," Ghara finally said, lowering her staff. "Now we can begin actual training." "That was not training." Ryder gasped, bending forward with his hands on his knees. "That was assessment." Ghara moved to a fallen log and sat down, gesturing for Ryder to join her. "You have learned forms and techniques, which is good. You have basic fitness and coordination, also good. But you fight like someone following a recipe rather than someone who understands cooking. Every move is planned before execution, which makes you predictable. And in a real fight, predictable means dead. So how do I become unpredictable? You learn to stop thinking." At Ryder's confused look, Ghara elaborated. Right now, your mind is involved in every action. You decide to strike high, so you think about striking high, which causes your body to prepare to strike high, which signals to your opponent exactly what you intend. We need to train your body to move without conscious thought, to respond to openings and threats faster than your mind can process them. And how long does that take? Years, if you want mastery, but we can start building the foundation now. Ghara stood and retrieved her staff. The key is repetition, until movements become instinct. We will drill basic patterns until your body knows them better than your mind does. Then we will introduce variables and chaos, forcing you to react rather than plan. They worked through the morning in patterns that seemed simple at first but grew increasingly complex. Ghara would demonstrate a sequence of movements, then have Ryder repeat it until he could perform it without thinking about each individual step. Strike high, rotate low, step back, thrust forward. Over and over until the pattern existed in muscle memory rather than conscious thought. When Ryder started to get sloppy from fatigue, Ghara called for a break. They sat in the clearing, passing a water skin back and forth, while birds called from the forest canopy and the distant sound of the lumber mill's operation provided a rhythmic backdrop. "You are a good student," Ghara said after a while. "You listen. You do not make excuses when you fail, and you do not let ego get in the way of learning. Hard to have much ego left after you have been beaten a dozen times before breakfast," Ryder said, but he smiled to show he did not resent it. "Where did you learn to teach like this?" "The way you break things down into parts, then build them back up into a whole, from my mother," Ghara said, and something softened in her expression. "She was one of our clan's weapon masters, responsible for training the young warriors. She believed that understanding why you did something was as important as knowing how to do it. Many orc trainers focus only on the physical, but my mother taught that the mind and body must work together. She sounds remarkable. She was." The past tense carried weight. "She died 3 years ago in a challenge combat with a rival clan's champion. Honorable death, as we measure such things, but a loss nonetheless." "I am sorry," Ryder said quietly. Ghara nodded acknowledgement of the sympathy but did not dwell on the grief. "She taught me that strength without wisdom is just violence, and violence without purpose is just destruction. That lesson shaped how I see the world." She glanced at Ryder. "It is part of why I left my clan. I grew tired of fighting for fighting's sake, of perpetuating cycles of revenge and territorial disputes that benefited no one. My clan elders said I was becoming too soft, too influenced by weak human philosophy. So I chose to leave and see for myself what else might exist beyond the constant warfare. Have you found anything worth the exile? I have found that the world is larger and more complicated than my clan ever acknowledged," Ghara said carefully. "I have found that some humans are as honorable as any orc warrior, and some orcs are as petty and cruel as the worst human raiders. I have found that belonging to a clan provides strength, but also limitation." She looked directly at him. "And I have found that loneliness is a constant companion when you exist between worlds, fully part of neither." Ryder understood that feeling in his bones. "I know that particular burden," he admitted. "After I left the guard, I kept expecting to feel liberated. Free from orders I disagreed with, free to make my own choices. Instead, I mostly just felt adrift. No purpose, no community, no clear path forward. And now I am learning to be comfortable with uncertainty," Ryder said. "Some days are harder than others, but at least I can sleep at night knowing I am not compromising my principles." Ghara smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her fierce features into something almost gentle. That is worth more than comfortable certainty built on moral compromise. They continued training through the afternoon, breaking only for a simple meal of bread and dried meat from Ghara's traveling supplies. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Ghara called an end to the session. "Tomorrow, same time," she said. "We will continue drilling basics, then begin introducing reactive training. Be prepared to work harder than you did today." "Looking forward to it," Ryder said, surprised to realize he meant it completely. His body ached in a dozen places, his hands were blistered from the staff work, and he knew he would be sore in the morning. But he also felt more alive than he had in months, engaged in something that demanded his full attention and pushed him to grow. "Ryder," Ghara said as he was gathering his things to leave, "thank you for meeting me out here away from town. I know it would have been easier to train somewhere more convenient, but doing this privately avoids complications for both of us." "I had not even thought about it," Ryder admitted. "But you are right. This is better." He hesitated, then added, "Though not because I am ashamed to be seen with you, just to be clear on that point." "I know," Ghara said softly. "Your actions yesterday made your character plain, but practical considerations matter regardless of principle. No sense making your life in Millbrook harder than it needs to be." They parted ways with Ghara, disappearing into the forest, presumably to whatever camp she had made for herself, while Ryder walked back across the bridge and into town. The lumber mill was closing down for the day, workers streaming out to head home or to the tavern. Several nodded to Ryder in passing, the casual acknowledgement of one working man to another. He wondered if they would still nod so easily if they knew how he had spent his day. Probably not, he decided. But that was their loss, not his. The following weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Every morning at dawn, Ryder would meet Ghara at the clearing beyond the mill bridge. They would train for hours, working through drills and exercises that gradually built his combat instincts. Ghara was a demanding teacher but never unfair, pushing him hard while also knowing when to call for rest or adjustment. As Ryder's skills improved, Ghara introduced more complexity. She would attack without warning during their breaks, forcing him to react defensively from a position of rest. She would change the rules mid-drill, requiring adaptation on the fly. She would fight him with different weapons, different styles, showing him how to read an opponent's approach and adjust his own tactics accordingly. Beyond the physical training, they talked. During breaks and walks back toward town, conversation flowed easily between them. Ghara told stories about her clan's history and culture, about growing up in the harsh mountain territories, where orc tribes made their homes. Ryder shared his own past, talking about his childhood on a small farm, his decision to join the border guard seeking adventure and purpose, his gradual disillusionment as he witnessed orders he could not in good conscience follow. They discovered shared interests in unexpected places. Both enjoyed the philosophical questions about duty and honor. Both had complicated relationships with the idea of home. Both found themselves caught between worlds, shaped by one culture but no longer fully comfortable within it. One morning, nearly 3 weeks into their training routine, Ghara appeared at the clearing with a wicked-looking bruise darkening the green skin along her jaw. "What happened?" Ryder demanded, dropping his practice staff and crossing to her immediately. "Nothing of consequence," Ghara said, but she touched the bruise gingerly. "Some men at the tavern last night decided an orc woman alone was an acceptable target for their frustrations. They discovered they were mistaken. Are they alive? Unfortunately for them, yes. The one will be drinking through a straw for a few weeks after I dislocated his jaw." Ghara's expression was grim. "I did not start the fight, and I showed more restraint than they deserved, but it will still be remembered as the violent orc who attacked poor innocent human men." Rage burned hot in Ryder's chest. "Which men? I will go into town right now and make sure they understand that actions have consequences." "No." Ghara caught his arm as he started to move past her. "That will only make things worse. You will be seen as the orc lover defending the savage aggressor. Your reputation will suffer and nothing will change for me. This is simply how things are." "It does not have to be how things are," Ryder insisted. "Perhaps not forever," Ghara said quietly, "but right now in this place, this is the reality we must navigate. Fighting it directly will only bring more trouble." Ryder wanted to argue, but the tired resignation in Ghara's eyes stopped him. This was not the first time she had dealt with such treatment, and it would not be the last. She had learned to pick her battles, to endure what could not be immediately changed, and fighting that wisdom with his own righteous anger would disrespect her experience. "I hate this," he said instead. "I hate that you have to deal with this, and I hate that there is nothing I can do to stop it." "You can continue treating me as a person rather than a monster," Ghara said. "That matters more than you might think." They trained that morning with an intensity that bordered on aggressive, both of them working out frustrations through physical exertion. Ryder found himself moving faster, striking harder, finally starting to access the instinctive reactions Ghara had been cultivating. When he managed to land a glancing blow against her shoulder, actually making contact for the first time in weeks of training, Ghara grinned with fierce pride. "There," she said triumphantly. "That is what I have been trying to draw out. You stopped thinking and just moved. That is the foundation we have been building toward." "I got lucky," Ryder protested, though pleasure at the accomplishment warmed him. "Luck is opportunity meeting preparation," Ghara countered. "You have been preparing for weeks. Now your body is starting to recognize and seize opportunities. We can build on this." They continued drilling, and Ryder found he could occasionally surprise Ghara now, landing touches that would not have been possible in their early sessions. He was still clearly the inferior fighter, losing the vast majority of exchanges, but the gap was closing. Measurable progress created its own motivation. During their midday break, Ryder broached a question that had been forming in his mind for days. "What are your plans? After you leave Millbrook, I mean. You mentioned traveling, seeing more of the world, but what are you actually looking for?" Ghara was quiet for a long moment, staring out into the forest. "I am looking for a place where I can exist without apology," she finally said. "Somewhere I am not automatically suspect, not constantly prepared for violence, not fundamentally alone among whatever population surrounds me. I do not know if such a place exists, but I keep searching." "What if we created it?" Ryder said before he could think better of the impulse. "What if instead of searching for somewhere that already exists, we found a place and made it into what we need?" Ghara's amber eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "I mean." Ryder struggled to articulate the idea forming in his mind. "You are not the only orc who has left their clan seeking something different. And I am not the only human who has become disillusioned with the hatred and fear that seems to define relations between our peoples. What if there was a place where people like us could settle? Somewhere on the frontier, away from established settlements and their entrenched prejudices. We could build something new." "That is a beautiful dream," Ghara said gently. "But dreams do not feed hungry bellies or provide shelter from winter storms. Building a homestead from nothing takes resources, labor, and time. It also requires cooperation from neighbors who would need to look past your choice of company." "I know it sounds impossible," Ryder admitted. "But 6 months ago, I would have said leaving the border guard was impossible too. Sometimes impossible things just take courage and commitment. Ghara studied him for a long moment, and Ryder had the uncomfortable sense of being evaluated at some fundamental level. "You truly believe this could work," she finally said. "This is not just optimistic talk for you. You actually think we could create a place of acceptance and peace." "I think if we do not try to create something better, nothing will ever change," Ryder said. "And I think you are too remarkable a person to spend your life wandering alone, being attacked by cowards and tolerated at best by those who should welcome your presence." Something shifted in Ghara's expression, some wall lowering behind her eyes. "You see me," she said softly. "Not what I am, but who I am. That is rarer than you might think." "You have done the same for me," Ryder pointed out. "You did not see a disgraced former guard when I walked into that tavern. You saw someone worth teaching, worth spending time with. That recognition goes both ways." "This is dangerous territory, Ryder." But Ghara did not move away, did not rebuild the wall. "If I am alone, I can move freely, adapt to circumstances, disappear when necessary. If I allow myself to care about staying near you, I lose that freedom, and you lose whatever future you might build in a human settlement." "Maybe I do not want a future in a human settlement," Ryder said. "Maybe I want a future that does not require me to pretend I do not value the friendship and respect of an extraordinary orc warrior. Maybe freedom is not about the ability to disappear, but the courage to stay." Ghara reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand against his chest. Her palm was warm through his shirt, and he could feel the controlled strength in her touch. "You are either the bravest human I have met or the most foolish." "I have been told it is probably both," Ryder said, covering her hand with his own. "But I am honest about what I want, even when what I want is complicated." "And what do you want?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications and possibilities. Ryder knew his answer would change things, that speaking truth would step them both onto uncertain ground. But he had already thrown away safety and respectability once for the sake of his principles. Doing so again felt less like sacrifice and more like freedom. "I want to see where this leads," he said simply. "This connection between us. I want to explore what we could build together, whether that is just a strong friendship or something more. And I want to stop pretending that conventional wisdom about humans and orcs matters more than what we actually experience with each other." "Something more," Ghara repeated, testing the words. "You understand that even entertaining such a possibility would make you a pariah in most human communities. That children who might result from such a union would be rejected by both peoples." "I understand the world as it currently exists," Ryder said. "I am talking about creating something different. And yes, that is frightening and uncertain, but spending my life playing it safe has never brought me satisfaction. Taking risks for what I actually value is the only thing that has ever felt right." Ghara's thumb traced a small circle against his chest, the gesture intimate and thoughtful. "I should say no," she murmured. "I should finish teaching you what I can, then leave Millbrook and continue traveling alone. That would be simpler and safer for us both." "But—" Ryder prompted when she fell silent. "But I am tired of simple and safe," Ghara admitted. "And I am tired of being alone. If you are truly willing to risk building something new, something that defies expectations and conventional wisdom, then perhaps I am willing to risk it alongside you." Ryder felt his heart hammering against his ribs, excitement and nervousness mixing in equal measure. "So we try this. See where it leads. We try this," Ghara confirmed. Then she stepped back, lowering her hand but holding his gaze. "Though we should be practical about how we proceed. Neither of us has resources to immediately strike out and establish a homestead. We need to plan, to save, to prepare properly. And we need to be careful about how much attention we draw in the meantime. Agreed. Ryder was already thinking through logistics, considering what would be required to make such a venture viable. I can pick up more work in town, save my wages. You could hire out your skills as well, maybe as a guard or hunter. If we both work through summer and autumn, by spring we might have enough to purchase land and basic supplies. Assuming we still feel the same way about this venture when spring arrives, Ghara pointed out. Grand plans made in the heat of the moment sometimes grow cold in the light of day. Then we will test it, Ryder suggested. We continue as we have been, training together, talking together, seeing if this connection deepens or fades. By the time winter breaks and spring makes travel feasible again, we will know whether this is a temporary dream or something worth building our lives around. A trial period, Ghara said with a slight smile. How very practical of you. I learned from an excellent teacher, Ryder replied, matching her smile with his own. They spent the rest of that afternoon discussing practical matters, mapping out what would be required to successfully establish a frontier homestead. They would need cleared land, building materials, tools, seed for crops, perhaps livestock if they could afford it. They would need to identify territory far enough from established settlements to avoid immediate conflict, but close enough to eventually trade with neighbors who might prove accepting of their unusual partnership. The conversation continued over subsequent days and weeks, theoretical planning becoming increasingly detailed and concrete. Ghara proved to have significant practical knowledge about wilderness survival, construction techniques, and resource management. Ryder contributed understanding of human settlement patterns, agricultural cycles, and the legal requirements for claiming frontier land. Their training sessions evolved as well. Now that they had acknowledged the potential for their relationship to develop beyond simple friendship, a new awareness hummed between them during drills. When Ghara adjusted Ryder's stance, placing her hands on his shoulders or hips to guide proper positioning, both of them noticed the contact in ways they had not before. When Ryder managed successful exchanges, matching Ghara's speed and reading her intentions correctly, pride and attraction mingled in her approving gaze. Nothing physically intimate happened during those weeks, both of them maintaining a cautious respect for boundaries as they continued testing whether their connection would prove lasting. But the potential shimmered between them, an unspoken promise that if this partnership truly proved viable, physical affection would be welcomed by both. Ryder took on extra work at the lumber mill and the local farms, establishing himself as a reliable laborer. Ghara hired out her services as a hunter, bringing back game that the tavern and local families purchased eagerly despite their general discomfort with her presence. Neither spoke openly about their plans, but both quietly accumulated the resources they would need. Summer deepened into full heat, then began the slow fade toward autumn. Leaves started to change color, and morning air carried the first hints of approaching cold. Ryder and Ghara's training continued to progress, his combat instincts sharpening under her relentless instruction, until they could spar as genuine partners rather than master and student. One evening in early autumn, Ryder returned to the boarding house after a long day of work to find the landlord waiting with a grim expression. "Need to talk to you," the older man said without preamble. "In private." They stepped into the landlord's small office, and Ryder braced himself for whatever was coming. He had been careful, discreet about his connection with Ghara, but small towns had eyes everywhere and gossip traveled fast. "I like you, Ryder," the landlord began. "You pay on time, keep your room clean, do not cause trouble. So I am giving you warning out of respect. There are men in town who are upset about you consorting with that orc woman. They have been drinking and talking, working themselves up to do something about it. My advice is to make yourself scarce for a few days, let tempers cool down. Who are these men? Ryder asked, though he could guess. The same ones who tried to start a fight with the orc a few weeks back, the landlord confirmed. They are calling it a matter of town pride, saying you are betraying human interests by training with the monster. It is nonsense, of course, but drunk men with wounded pride rarely think clearly. Thank you for the warning, Ryder said sincerely. I will handle it, by leaving town for a bit. By making sure Ghara is safe, Ryder corrected, and by not backing down to bullies who mistake prejudice for principle. The landlord sighed heavily. I figured you would say something like that. Just try not to get yourself killed over this, all right? And if things go badly, do not bring the trouble back to my property. I've got a business to run. Fair enough, Ryder agreed. He left the boarding house immediately, heading for the clearing where he and Ghara trained. She was not there at this hour, but he knew she made camp somewhere in the surrounding forest. After 20 minutes of searching and calling out softly, she materialized from the shadows looking alert and concerned. What is wrong? She asked without preamble. Ryder explained the landlord's warning, watching tension gather in Ghara's shoulders. So we have a choice, he concluded. We can leave town immediately, abandon our plans and find somewhere else to settle. Or we can confront this directly, make it clear that intimidation will not work. Or I can leave and you can stay, Ghara offered. That removes the source of their complaint and lets you continue building your resources here. No, Ryder's response was immediate and absolute. We committed to trying this partnership, testing whether we could build something together. The first challenge we face, I am not abandoning that commitment. Even if meeting that challenge means violence. I spent years training to defend myself and others, Ryder pointed out, and you have spent months teaching me to fight properly. If some drunk idiots force a confrontation, I am confident we can handle ourselves. Ghara studied him in the gathering darkness. You are certain about this. Once we confront them directly, there is no going back. You will be marking yourself permanently as an outsider in human settlements. I was already an outsider the moment I refused my commander's order, Ryder said. I have been trying to find a place where I fit in conventional society, but maybe I fit better outside those boundaries. With you. With me, Ghara echoed softly. Then she straightened her shoulders, warrior readiness settling over her like armor. Very well. If we are doing this, we do it properly. Tomorrow morning, we walk through town together in full daylight. We make it clear that we are partners, that attempts to intimidate or separate us will fail, and that anyone who wants to challenge that arrangement can do so openly rather than through whispered threats. That could get ugly fast, Ryder warned. Probably, Ghara agreed. But better an honest confrontation than endless skulking and threats. At least this way we control the timing and location. They spent that night camped together in the forest, both too keyed up to sleep properly. Ghara told stories about challenge combats in her clan, describing the formal rules and ritual that governed such confrontations. Ryder shared what he knew about tavern brawls and border town conflicts, the unwritten codes that separated a simple fight from something more serious. When dawn came, they prepared carefully. Both dressed in their training gear, functional clothing that allowed freedom of movement. Ryder wore his short sword openly, while Ghara carried her staff. Neither armor nor weapons were aggressive displays, but both were clear statements that they could defend themselves if necessary. They walked into Millbrook side by side, taking the main road through the center of town, rather than the discreet paths they had previously used. Early morning workers stopped and stared. Shopkeepers paused in opening their establishments. By the time Ryder and Ghara reached the town square, they had accumulated an audience of several dozen people. "Ryder Lancaster," a voice called out. One of the men from the tavern stepped forward, two companions flanking him. Ryder recognized the one with the healing jaw, the man Ghara had fought weeks ago. "You need to reconsider your choice of company. That orc does not belong here, and you are making yourself unwelcome by association." "Ghara has broken no laws and caused no trouble," Ryder responded clearly, projecting his voice so the gathered crowd could hear. "She has been nothing but respectful and professional during her time in Millbrook. If you have specific grievances, state them openly rather than making vague threats." "The grievance is that she is an orc," the man spat. "Her kind killed families in these parts 20 years ago. Just because she smiles and pays for her drinks does not make her any less a monster." "I was 4 years old 20 years ago," Ghara said, her voice carrying calm authority. "I had nothing to do with those raids, just as most of you had nothing to do with the human armies that burned orc settlements during the same period. If we are all to be judged by the worst actions of our respective peoples, then none of us can claim innocence." "She has a point," someone in the crowd muttered, loud enough to be heard. The confrontational man's face reddened. "You defending the monster now, Miller?" "I am saying maybe we should judge individuals by their own actions rather than ancestral grudges," the miller responded, stepping forward to stand where his voice would carry. "That orc woman brought down 3 deer last week that fed half the families in this town. She has caused no trouble, started no fights even when provoked. Seems to me she has earned the benefit of doubt." "Thank you," Ryder said, nodding to the miller in gratitude. "This is not over," the aggressive man growled, but some wind had gone out of his sails with the crowd's divided reaction. "We will be watching. One wrong move from that orc, one hint of trouble, and we will drive you both out." "Fair enough," Ghara said evenly. "I invite the same scrutiny of your own behavior. One unprovoked attack, one drunken assault, and I will respond with appropriate force. We can either coexist peacefully or demonstrate who represents the greater threat to this community's well-being." The standoff held for a tense moment. Then the man and his companions turned and stalked away, muttering among themselves. The crowd began to disperse, returning to their morning routines with frequent backward glances. The miller approached Ryder and Ghara, extending his hand. "Jonas Miller. I run the mill that probably keeps you awake some nights with the wheel noise." "Ryder Lancaster," Ryder replied, shaking the offered hand. "And this is Ghara." Ghara inclined her head respectfully but did not offer her hand, clearly uncertain how the gesture would be received. Jonas nodded back without apparent discomfort. "That was bravely done," Jonas said. "Standing up to Terran and his friends takes spine. They are loud and angry but mostly cowards at heart. Still, you should be careful. Cornered cowards sometimes do desperate things." "We will be careful," Ryder assured him. "And thank you for speaking up. That could not have been easy." "My daughter married an elf from the eastern provinces," Jonas said with a slight smile. "Took me a while to come around to the idea, but she is happy and he treats her well. Taught me that different is not the same as dangerous. Figured I should speak that lesson aloud when it mattered." They talked for a few more minutes, Jonas offering practical advice about navigating Millbrook's social dynamics and suggesting others in town who might be sympathetic. When he returned to his mill, Ryder felt cautiously optimistic that the confrontation had gone better than expected. "That was not as bad as it could have been," Ghara observed as they walked toward the tavern for breakfast. "No," Ryder agreed. "But it is not over either. Terran and his friends will nurse their resentment and we will need to be vigilant." They were, spending the following weeks hyper-aware of their surroundings, but the expected violence never materialized. Whether because Jonas Miller's support had undermined Taryn's confidence, or simply because public confrontation had diffused the building tension, the aggressive men seemed to back down. They still glared and muttered when Ryder or Ghara passed, but they made no further threats. Other townspeople began to cautiously engage with Ghara. A farm wife asked if she would be willing to hunt some foxes that were raiding chicken coops. A carpenter inquired if her strength might be available for hire moving heavy timber. Slowly, grudgingly, parts of Millbrook began to accept Ghara's presence as something other than a temporary threat. Autumn progressed toward winter, leaves falling and cold settling into the mornings. Ryder and Ghara continued their training, their partnership evolving into something that felt increasingly natural and permanent. They still maintained separate living arrangements, Ghara in her forest camp and Ryder at the boarding house, but they spent most of their waking hours together. One evening in late autumn, after a particularly good training session where Ryder had actually managed to score several clean hits against Ghara, they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I think this is going to work," Ryder said quietly. "This partnership, this plan to build something together, I think we can actually make it happen." "I think so too," Ghara replied. She reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. The gesture was simple but profound, physical affection offered and accepted. "We have weathered the initial tests. We work well together. And I find that I do not want to imagine continuing this journey without you." Ryder turned to look at her, seeing the vulnerability in her expression, the courage it took for her to admit such feelings. "I am falling in love with you," he said, speaking the truth he had been circling around for weeks. "I know that is complicated and problematic and goes against everything conventional wisdom says is acceptable, but it is true regardless." Ghara's amber eyes reflected the sunset's fire. "I am falling in love with you as well," she said softly. "And you are right that it is complicated and problematic, but it also feels more real and right than anything I have experienced before." Ryder leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull back. When she did not, when she instead met him halfway, their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle and tentative and absolutely perfect. Ghara's tusks made the angle slightly awkward, but they adjusted naturally, finding a rhythm that worked. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling with a mixture of joy and wonder. "Well," Ghara said, slightly breathless, "that was worth waiting for," Ryder finished. They sat together as darkness fell, hands joined and shoulders touching, talking about everything and nothing. When cold finally drove them to seek shelter, they parted with another kiss, and the unspoken understanding that their relationship had crossed a threshold. Over the following weeks, their physical relationship developed alongside their emotional connection. They were careful and respectful of boundaries, checking with each other constantly to ensure comfort and consent. But the growing intimacy felt natural and right. Two people learning how to exist together in all the ways that mattered. Winter arrived in earnest, snow falling heavy and cold wind driving most people indoors. Ghara finally accepted Ryder's offer to move into his room at the boarding house, rather than continuing to camp in the forest. The landlord raised an eyebrow at the arrangement but said nothing, apparently willing to accept unusual circumstances as long as rent continued to be paid. They spent the long winter months planning and preparing. Ryder had been studying maps of the frontier territories, identifying potential locations for their homestead. Ghara had been learning about human agricultural practices, complementing her existing knowledge of hunting and wilderness survival. Together they calculated what resources they would need, what preparations would be essential, and what timeline was realistic. "Spring, then," Ryder said one evening as they sat reviewing their plans by candlelight. "As soon as the roads clear and travel becomes feasible, we strike out and claim our land." "Spring," Ghara agreed. "It will be hard work, building everything from nothing. Long days, uncertain outcomes, constant challenges. But we will be doing it together," Ryder pointed out. "And we will be doing it on our own terms, creating something that reflects our values rather than conforming to others' expectations." "Together," Ghara repeated, smiling. "I like the sound of that." Winter passed slowly but not unpleasantly. Ryder continued taking what work was available during the cold months, mostly repair and maintenance tasks around town. Ghara hunted when weather allowed, keeping the tavern and friendly families supplied with meat. Their savings grew steadily, approaching the amount they had calculated would be necessary. Not everyone in Millbrook accepted their relationship. Taryn and his friends continued to radiate hostility whenever their paths crossed. Some families made it clear that Ryder and Ghara were not welcome in their establishments or on their property. But others, like Jonas Miller, made deliberate efforts to be welcoming and supportive. A few even confided that they admired the courage it took to defy convention so openly. One afternoon in late winter, Ghara returned from a hunting trip looking troubled. She found Ryder in their room and closed the door carefully before speaking. "I saw signs of an orc hunting party in the forest," she said without preamble. "A dozen warriors, maybe more, moving south from clan territories. They are either pursuing someone or raiding, and either way their presence means danger." "For us specifically or for Millbrook generally?" Ryder asked, already reaching for his sword. "Potentially both." Ghara was checking her own gear, verifying that her weapons were ready. "If they are raiders, Millbrook is an obvious target. If they are pursuing an exile or deserter, they might recognize me and demand cooperation based on clan law. Either scenario creates complications. What do you want to do?" Ghara looked at him with fierce gratitude. Not what should we do, but what do you want to do, giving her agency and respecting her judgment. "We warn the town," she decided. "Regardless of my complicated history with clan politics, innocent people do not deserve to be caught unprepared. After that, we assess what the hunting party actually wants and make decisions based on reality rather than speculation." They went immediately to find Jonas Miller, who listened to their warning with grave attention. He agreed to quietly alert the town's capable fighters and ensure that vulnerable families were prepared to shelter in reinforced buildings if necessary. News of an orc hunting party would cause panic if announced publicly, but strategic preparation could happen discreetly. The hunting party arrived 2 days later, 15 orc warriors in full combat gear moving through Millbrook with confident purpose. They made no aggressive moves, but their mere presence caused shops to close and streets to empty as people sought safety. The party's leader, a massive warrior with ritual scars across his face and arms, stopped in the town square and called out in heavily accented but clear human language. "We seek the exile called Ghara. Provide her location and we will leave peacefully. Refuse and we will search until we find her." Ryder and Ghara had been watching from Jonas Miller's property. At the leader's words, Ghara straightened her shoulders and stepped into the open. "I am Ghara," she called back. "I left the clan honorably. You have no authority to demand anything of me." The leader studied her with cold assessment. "The elders disagree with your definition of honor. You abandoned your clan during a time of conflict, weakening our strength and insulting our traditions. You are summoned to return and face judgment." "I left because I could no longer stomach pointless warfare and cycles of revenge that serve no one," Ghara responded, walking closer until she stood perhaps 20 feet from the leader. I did so openly, announcing my departure and surrendering my claim to clan resources. By the old codes, that is exile, not desertion. The old codes do not account for exile who consort with humans, the leader growled, his gaze sliding to Ryder. You have become exactly what the elders warned, corrupted by weak human sentiment, forgetting the strength that makes orcs superior. I have forgotten nothing, Ghara said coldly. I simply chose to value wisdom over blind adherence to tradition. If that makes me corrupted in your eyes, then corruption is a mark of honor. The leader's hand moved to his weapon. You will return with us, willingly or bound. Those are your only choices. There is a third choice, Ryder said, stepping forward to stand beside Ghara. You leave now peacefully and accept that Ghara has chosen a different path. No one needs to fight. No one needs to die. You return to your clan and report that the exile is lost to human lands, which is technically true. Humans do not dictate terms to orc warriors, the leader spat. This human does if you threaten someone I love, Ryder replied evenly. His hand rested on his sword hilt, the gesture casual but unmistakable. I am not your enemy, but I will become one if you force the issue. Behind Ryder, other townspeople had emerged, Jonas Miller and several others carrying weapons of their own. Not an army, but enough to make a fight costly for the orc hunting party. The leader assessed the situation, clearly calculating odds. His warriors could almost certainly defeat the humans and drag Ghara back by force. But doing so would result in casualties, and success would come at a high price. For a mission meant to reclaim an exile rather than conquer territory, such costs might not be justifiable. You have chosen humans over your own kind, the leader finally said to Ghara, his voice heavy with disgust. You are dead to the clan. Do not return to our territories. If we encounter you again, you will be treated as an enemy. Understood, Ghara replied, her voice steady despite the pain Ryder could see in her eyes. Being officially declared dead to her clan, exiled permanently, carried weight beyond simple separation. The hunting party turned and marched out of Millbrook without further confrontation. When they had disappeared back into the forest, the watching townspeople slowly relaxed. Thank you, Ghara said to Jonas and the others who had stood ready to fight. You did not have to take that risk. You warned us about the danger, Jonas replied simply. And you have been a good neighbor these past months. Seemed only right to return the favor. He glanced at Ryder. Besides, the young man there looked ready to fight an entire orc war party single-handed, figured he could use some backup. I was not looking forward to that fight, Ryder admitted, but I would have done it if necessary. Fortunately, it was not necessary, Ghara said softly. She touched Ryder's arm, a gesture of gratitude and affection, but knowing you would have means everything. That evening, back in their room, Ghara was quiet and withdrawn. Ryder gave her space for a while, then sat beside her on the bed. You are mourning, he said gently. Losing your clan permanently, even after choosing to leave, that is a real loss. It is, Ghara admitted. I knew leaving would mean separation, but some part of me always imagined I might return someday. That door is closed now. I am truly alone in the world except for what we build together. Then we build something worth the sacrifice, Ryder said firmly. We create a home and a life that honors your choice, that proves you made the right decision. And you are not alone. You have me, and I am not going anywhere. Ghara leaned against him, accepting the comfort he offered. I do not regret my choice, she said quietly. Even knowing the cost, I would make the same decision, but that does not mean the cost is not real. I know, Ryder said, holding her close. We will carry it together. They sat in comfortable silence, drawing strength from each other's presence. Outside, winter continued its hold on the land, but spring was coming. Spring and new beginnings, the chance to finally start building the future they had been planning. When the thaw finally came and roads became passable again, Ryder and Ghara prepared for departure. They had accumulated enough resources to make their venture viable, and Jonah's miller had provided useful contacts in the frontier territories who might be willing to sell land to an unconventional couple. The morning they planned to leave, several townspeople gathered to see them off. Jonah's was there, along with a handful of others who had become genuinely friendly over the winter months. Even a few who had been hostile initially showed up, if not to wish them well then at least to acknowledge their departure. "You be careful out there," Jonas said, shaking both their hands. "Frontier living is hard even for experienced settlers, but if anyone can make it work, I reckon you two can." "Thank you," Ryder said sincerely, "for everything. Your support meant more than you probably realize." "You taught us something worth knowing," Jonas replied. "That different does not have to mean enemy. I will not forget that lesson." They left Millbrook heading west, toward territories where land was cheap and supervision distant. The journey took 3 weeks of steady travel, following trader routes and frontier paths through increasingly wild country. They camped each night, sharing the work of setting up shelter and preparing meals, falling into rhythms of partnership that felt effortless. The land they eventually claimed was in a broad valley with good water, decent soil, and forest nearby for timber. No other homesteads were visible, though a small trading post was about a day's travel away. Remote but not completely isolated, exactly what they had been hoping to find. "What do you think?" Ryder asked, standing beside Ghara and surveying the valley. "I think it is perfect," Ghara said, smiling. "I think this is where we build our future." They filed the necessary papers at the trading post, claiming their land under frontier settlement laws. The clerk raised eyebrows at their mixed-species partnership, but completed the paperwork without comment. By evening, they owned 40 acres of valley land, enough for a small farm and plenty of room to expand. The first weeks were exhausting labor from dawn to dusk. They cleared land for a cabin, cutting timber and hauling it to their chosen building site. Ghara's strength made tasks like moving logs and lifting roof beams manageable that would have been impossible for Ryder alone. His knowledge of construction techniques and agricultural planning ensured their work would result in a functional homestead rather than just random structures. They built a single-room cabin first, focusing on getting solid shelter established before anything else. The walls went up slowly but steadily, each log carefully fitted and chinked. When they finally raised the roof and secured it against weather, both of them stood back looking at their work with fierce pride. "It is not much," Ryder said. "Just one room, rough furniture, no luxuries." "It is ours," Ghara replied, slipping her hand into his. "Built by our labor, representing our choices, standing as proof that we can create something lasting together. It is everything." They spent their first night in the completed cabin lying on a simple mattress they had constructed from pine boughs and blankets, watching firelight flicker against the log walls. "I love you," Ryder said into the comfortable darkness. "I know I have said it before, but it feels important to say it again here, in the home we built together." "I love you too," Ghara replied, her voice warm. "And I am glad we took this chance, glad we refused to accept what the world said was impossible." "We should probably make this official at some point," Ryder suggested. "Get married, I mean. I do not know what orc customs are for such things, and human customs will not exactly accommodate our situation, but we could create our own ceremony, something that honors both our backgrounds." "I would like that," Ghara said softly. "When things are more settled, when we have proven we can make this life work, we should definitely make a formal commitment." Spring turned to summer, and the homestead developed day by day. They planted crops in cleared fields, established a vegetable garden near the cabin, built a small barn for future livestock. Ghara hunted regularly, keeping them supplied with meat and building up stores of preserved food for the coming winter. Ryder managed the farming and continued expanding their structures, adding a separate workshop and a smokehouse. The trading post became their occasional connection to the broader world. Every few weeks, one of them would make the day-long trip to purchase supplies and sell whatever surplus their labor produced. Word spread about the unusual homestead, the human man and orc woman building a life together in the remote valley. Most people seemed content to leave them alone, though occasionally traders would detour slightly to satisfy curiosity. One such trader, an older woman who ran a regular route through the frontier territories, stopped by in midsummer with a wagon full of goods. "Heard about you too," she said frankly, accepting the water Ryder offered. "Wanted to see for myself if the stories were true. Human and orc building a homestead together seems impossible." "We have heard that before," Ghara said with dry amusement. "Yet here we are, very much possible." The trader walked around the property, examining their work with a practiced eye. "You have done well," she finally said. "Better than many human couples I have seen try to settle the frontier. You have good water, decent structures, crops that look healthy. If you can get through your first winter, you will probably make it long-term." "That is the plan," Ryder confirmed. "I will spread the word that you are reliable and serious," the trader offered. "Might help you establish trading relationships, make your life a bit easier. And if you ever need specific supplies or want to sell goods beyond what the trading post can handle, I come through these parts every 6 weeks or so." They took her up on the offer, beginning a trading relationship that proved valuable over subsequent months. Through her, they were able to acquire things like proper tools, quality seed, and eventually a pair of goats that provided milk and cheese. As summer deepened toward autumn, Ryder and Ghara began planning their wedding ceremony. Neither wanted a traditional human or orc ritual, both of which would feel incomplete given their mixed heritage. Instead, they designed something new, blending elements from both cultures into a ceremony that felt uniquely theirs. They chose the autumn equinox for the date, a day of balance between light and dark, summer and winter, perfectly symbolic of their union bridging different worlds. With no community to witness, they invited the trader woman and the clerk from the trading post, the only people in the area who had shown them genuine acceptance and respect. On the chosen day, they dressed in their finest clothes, simple garments they had made themselves decorated with symbols meaningful to both cultures. The ceremony took place in the clearing in front of their cabin, with the valley spreading out behind them and forest rising on all sides. Ryder had written vows that spoke of commitment and partnership, of choosing love over convention and building something new from courage and determination. Ghara had composed promises in both human and orc languages, words of loyalty and devotion that honored her heritage while embracing her chosen future. They exchanged simple rings they had crafted from silver ore found in the nearby hills, bands inscribed with symbols representing strength, wisdom, and unity. The trader woman pronounced them married according to frontier custom, which held that declarations made before witnesses were binding regardless of official paperwork. "I present Ryder and Ghara Lancaster," she announced with genuine warmth. "May their union be long and prosperous." The small gathering celebrated with a meal of fresh game, garden vegetables, and berry wine Ghara had been fermenting in preparation. It was simple and perfect, a beginning that felt right in ways that elaborate ceremonies never could have. That night, lying together as husband and wife in the cabin they had built with their own hands, Ryder marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "We did it," he said softly. "We created something impossible." "We created something necessary," Ghara corrected gently. "The world needs proof that different peoples can build lives together, that love and respect can bridge divides that seem unbridgeable. We are that proof." "No pressure," Ryder joked, making Ghara laugh. "We do not have to change the entire world," she said. "We just have to live our lives with integrity and show anyone willing to see that this can work. The rest will follow, or it will not. Either way, we have each other and this life we have built. That is enough." Autumn turned to winter, and they faced their first serious test as homesteaders. Snow fell heavy and cold winds battered their valley. But the cabin they had built proved solid and warm. Their stores of food held through the long months, and they discovered that facing hardship together somehow made it bearable. On the worst days, when snow piled high and cold seemed to seep through every crack despite their best efforts, they would sit by the fire and tell each other stories. Ghara shared legends from her clan's history, tales of great warriors and wise leaders who had shaped orc culture over generations. Ryder contributed human folklore and personal memories, painting pictures of the world beyond their valley. They also planned for spring, discussing what they would plant, how they might expand their structures, whether they should try to acquire more livestock. The planning was practical but also hopeful, built on the assumption that they would successfully survive to see another growing season. When spring finally arrived, they had not only survived but thrived. Their stores were depleted but not exhausted. Their cabin had weathered the winter without major damage. They themselves had grown even closer, the forced intimacy of winter months deepening their bond. The second year of homesteading was easier than the first in many ways. They knew what worked and what needed adjustment. Their crops were more productive with a full season of preparation. Their trading relationships were established, providing reliable income and access to necessary supplies. Other changes came as well. A family of human homesteaders settled about 5 miles away, drawn by reports of good land. They were initially wary of Ryder and Ghara's unusual household, but slowly warmed after repeated friendly encounters. The father, a veteran of border conflicts like Ryder, admitted he had fought against orcs in the past, but found he could not maintain that enmity in the face of Ghara's obvious decency and competence. A half-orc trader, the child of a mixed union similar to their own, sought them out specifically after hearing about their homestead. She spent an evening sharing her own experiences growing up rejected by both humans and orcs, finding acceptance only in the fluid communities of traders and travelers. The three of them talked late into the night about the challenges of existing between worlds and the hope that future generations might face less prejudice. These encounters, rare but meaningful, reminded Ryder and Ghara that they were not completely alone in their experience. Other people were navigating similar paths, creating lives that defied conventional boundaries. The network was loose and scattered, but it existed. By their third year on the homestead, they had expanded significantly. Their fields produced enough surplus to trade extensively. They had acquired sheep and chickens in addition to the goats, creating a small but productive farm. The cabin had been expanded with a second room, and they had built a proper barn and storage buildings. They had also begun to develop something of a reputation in the frontier territories. Word spread about the human-orc couple, who had not only survived, but genuinely prospered in the challenging valley lands. Some people sought them out as curiosities, but others came looking for proof that such partnerships could work, hope that their own complicated situations might find acceptance somewhere. Ryder and Ghara welcomed visitors cautiously, willing to share their story but protective of the peace they had built. They offered advice when asked, assistance when they could spare it, and simple acceptance to those who needed it. Their homestead began to function as an informal way station for travelers who did not quite fit in more conventional settlements. One spring morning in their 4th year, Ghara announced that she was pregnant. The news was both exciting and terrifying, raising questions about what their child's life would look like, what challenges a half-orc child might face even in the relatively accepting frontier territories. "We will figure it out," Ryder said, holding Ghara close and feeling wonder at the life growing within her. "The same way we have figured out everything else, together with determination and love." "I am scared," Ghara admitted. "Not of childbirth itself, but of what kind of world we are bringing this child into. Will they be rejected by both peoples? Will they spend their life feeling like they belong nowhere?" "They will belong here," Ryder said firmly, "with us in this home we have built. And we will teach them that belonging is not about what others think. It is about knowing your own worth and choosing your own path. They will have what neither of us truly had growing up, parents who model what it means to build bridges instead of walls." "You always know what to say," Ghara murmured, some of the fear easing from her expression. "I have a remarkable teacher," Ryder replied, kissing her forehead. "She taught me that impossible things just take courage and commitment." The pregnancy progressed normally, and their life continued with the rhythms they had established. Ghara modified her hunting practices as she grew heavier, focusing on tasks closer to home while Ryder took on more of the ranging work. They prepared a corner of the cabin as a nursery, building a cradle and gathering supplies for the coming child. In late autumn, with the harvest completed and winter approaching, Ghara went into labor. The trader woman had agreed to stay with them for the birth, providing experienced assistance. The labor was long and difficult, as half-orc births apparently tended to be, but eventually a healthy baby boy emerged, crying lustily and waving tiny fists at the world. They named him Kale, a name that worked in both human and orc languages, meaning strength and wisdom depending on pronunciation. He had Ryder's lighter skin tone, but Ghara's amber eyes and small tusks that would grow more prominent as he aged. Looking at their son, Ryder felt overwhelming love mixed with fierce protectiveness. "He is perfect," Ghara said, exhausted but radiant as she held Kale for the first time. "Absolutely perfect. He is ours," Ryder agreed, "and we will make sure he grows up knowing he is loved and valued exactly as he is." Raising Kale brought new challenges and adjustments to their homestead life. The work did not stop for exhaustion or sleepless nights, so they learned to manage farming and childcare simultaneously. But they also discovered joy in watching Kale grow and develop, in seeing him respond to their love and attention with his own affection. As Kale grew from infant to toddler, it became clear he had inherited both parents' best qualities. He was strong like Ghara, quick to develop physically and showing early signs of her natural coordination. But he also had Ryder's curiosity and empathy, constantly asking questions and showing concern when he sensed others were upset. The handful of neighbors who had settled within traveling distance of their homestead were universally kind to Kale, treating him simply as a child rather than focusing on his mixed heritage. The veteran homesteader's children played with him when families visited, accepting his small tusks and unusual features without the prejudice their parents' generation carried. "Maybe this is what changing the world actually looks like," Ghara said one evening, watching Kale play with wooden toys Ryder had carved. Not grand gestures or dramatic statements, but children growing up thinking differences are normal, people of different races being neighbors and friends. "I think you are right," Ryder agreed. "We are not going to single-handedly end generations of hatred and fear, but we can create spaces where that hatred does not take root, where the next generation learns better patterns." "Our impossible life, making new things possible," Ghara said with a smile. Years continued to pass, each one building on the foundation they had laid. Their homestead prospered through good seasons and survived difficult ones. Kale grew into a bright, capable boy who learned farming from Ryder and hunting from Ghara, who could speak both human and orc languages, who knew stories and songs from both cultures. Other mixed families began to settle in the general area, drawn by reports of acceptance and community that honored complicated identities. The veteran homesteader started organizing occasional gatherings where the scattered households would come together for festivals and shared work projects. These events were small by conventional standards, maybe a dozen families at most, but they represented something new and important. Ryder and Ghara's homestead became a kind of anchor for this developing community, the first and most established example of what was possible. They did not seek leadership roles, but others naturally looked to them for advice and guidance on navigating the challenges of frontier life and mixed heritage households. One summer evening, more than a decade after they had first claimed their valley land, Ryder and Ghara sat on the porch of their expanded cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Kale was practicing his archery in the yard, showing early signs of becoming an excellent marksman under Ghara's patient instruction. "You ever regret it?" Ryder asked quietly. "Leaving your clan, giving up the life you knew, all the hardship and challenge that followed?" Ghara was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "There are things I miss," she finally said. "The camaraderie of clan life, the deep connection to tradition and history, knowing my place in a larger structure. But regret? No. I chose this path with open eyes, and every difficult moment has been balanced by something wonderful. I have a partner who respects and loves me completely. I have a son who will grow up free from many of the prejudices that shaped my own childhood. I have a life I built according to my own values rather than simply accepting what was handed to me. That is worth every sacrifice." "I feel the same," Ryder said, taking her hand. "My life before seems almost unreal now, like it belonged to someone else. This is who I actually am. Your husband, Kale's father, a homesteader building something meaningful on the frontier. Everything that led me here was worth it." "We should tell people that," Ghara suggested. "Not as bragging, but as testimony. There are probably others out there wondering if they should take chances on impossible things, uncertain if the cost is worth the reward. We can tell them from experience that it is. That building a life based on principle and love is harder but infinitely more satisfying than accepting convenient compromise. You want to write our story, maybe, or just be open about sharing it when opportunities arise." Ghara smiled. "We are not heroes or revolutionaries, Ryder. We are just two people who chose each other despite the world saying we should not. But sometimes ordinary people living extraordinary lives with integrity is exactly what the world needs to see. Then we will keep living our life," Ryder said, "and trust that our example speaks for itself." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their son practice and their valley darken with approaching night. The cabin behind them was warm and welcoming, filled with the accumulated artifacts of a life well lived. The fields around them were productive, the animals healthy, the structures solid. Everything they had built together, every choice validated by results. More years passed, each bringing its own challenges and victories. Kale grew into a young man who embodied the best of both his heritages, strong and thoughtful, capable of both fierce loyalty and gentle compassion. He became a bridge himself, moving easily between the human and orc communities, respected by both for his skills and character. The frontier settlement they were part of developed into something that defied easy categorization. Not quite a town, not exactly a clan, but a community of people who had chosen to define themselves by values rather than racial categories. Humans, orcs, elves, and various mixed heritage individuals created households and lives side by side, not without friction but with genuine commitment to making it work. Ryder and Ghara aged together, their bodies showing the marks of hard physical labor but their spirits remaining strong. They had built something that would outlast them, created a foundation that the next generation could build upon. Their love, tested by time and challenge, had only deepened and matured. One autumn evening, nearly 30 years after that day in the Dusty Spoke Tavern when Ghara had pinned Ryder's arm and offered to teach him over dinner, they stood together at the edge of their property, looking out over the valley that had become their home. "I was thinking about that first day," Ryder said, gray threading through his hair but his eyes still bright. "How you took me down in 2 seconds flat, then offered me a lesson and a meal. I had no idea where that offer would lead." "Neither did I," Ghara admitted, her own strength still evident despite the years. "I just saw someone who needed teaching and figured I had knowledge to share. I certainly did not imagine we would end up here with all of this." "Best 2 seconds of my life," Ryder said with a smile. "Getting defeated by an orc woman in a tavern, then being brave enough or foolish enough to say yes when she offered to teach me." "Definitely both brave and foolish," Ghara agreed, laughing. "But then, all the best things in life require some measure of both." Behind them, Kale was hosting a gathering at his own cabin, built on their land but serving as his independent household. The sounds of conversation and laughter drifted through the evening air, voices of multiple races blending together without conflict. Their son had found a partner of his own, a human woman from one of the neighboring homesteads, and they were expecting their first child. Another generation, carrying forward the legacy of choosing love over convention. "We did it," Ryder said softly. "Everything we hoped to build, everything we imagined might be possible. It exists now, real and solid and lasting." "We did it together," Ghara corrected, slipping her hand into his with the ease of decades of partnership. "Neither of us could have accomplished this alone. But together, we made the impossible real." They stood watching darkness fall over their valley, comfortable in the silence that comes from two people who have shared a lifetime together. Around them, the homestead they had built from nothing continued its quiet rhythms. The fields waited for next season's planting. The barn sheltered animals through the night. The cabin held memories of countless evenings like this, two people finding their way to each other against all odds and expectations. "I love you," Ryder said, the words as true and necessary as the first time he had spoken them decades ago. "I love you too," Ghara replied, her voice warm with contentment and affection. "Always have, always will." Above them, stars emerged in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting and every moment since. The world beyond their valley continued its complicated dance of prejudice and progress, conflict and reconciliation. But here, in this place they had created through determination and love, peace reigned. They had built an impossible dream into solid reality, proving that courage and commitment could overcome any obstacle. Their life together stood as testament to the truth that love recognizes no boundaries, that family is created through choice and devotion, that a better world begins with individuals willing to live according to their principles, regardless of cost. As they turned to walk back to their cabin, hands joined and steps matched from long practice, both of them felt the deep satisfaction of lives well lived. They had faced every challenge together, overcome every obstacle, and created something that would endure long after they were gone. The homestead, the community, the example they provided of what was possible when people chose love over fear. It had started with a pinned arm, an offer of teaching, and the courage to say yes to an uncertain future. It had become a lifetime of partnership, a legacy of acceptance, and proof that the impossible was simply the not yet accomplished waiting for someone brave enough to try. Their story was complete, not because it had ended, but because it had fulfilled every promise and exceeded every hope. Two people from different worlds who had created a world entirely their own, built on respect and love, and the fierce determination to prove that differences could be bridges rather than barriers. As they entered their cabin and closed the door against the night, the warm light from within spilled out into the darkness, a beacon of possibility for anyone who might pass by and wonder what kind of life could exist in this remote valley. The answer was simple and profound. A life of love, built against impossible odds, sustained by unwavering commitment, and made beautiful by two people who had seen each other truly and chosen to walk together into an uncertain future that became certain through their partnership. The orc woman had pinned his arm in 2 seconds flat, then offered to teach him over dinner. From that moment, everything had changed. Not immediately and not without struggle, but completely and irrevocably. They had learned together that strength meant choosing compassion, that wisdom came from challenging assumptions, and that true courage was building the life you believed in rather than accepting the life others expected. Their impossible love had become the foundation of something enduring and beautiful, proof written in cabin walls and cultivated fields, and the laughter of grandchildren, who would never question whether different peoples could create families together. The story that began with a sparring match and a shared meal had grown into a legacy that would ripple through generations, changing what was possible one choice, one act of courage, one commitment at a time. And so they lived, happily ever after, in the life they had built together against all expectations. Their love a quiet revolution written in the ordinary miracles of daily partnership and shared dreams fulfilled. The world beyond might still struggle with the questions they had answered through their lives, but here in their valley, surrounded by the community they had helped create, the answer was simple and complete. Love endured, families thrived, and impossible dreams became solid reality when two people were brave enough to try.